I was far from the quiet cul-de-sac and its unchanging comfort. We have 2 garages and identical mailboxes neatly lined up along the street, with barbecues in every backyard. It's typically American. Repetitive plots of 12 acres with more than pleasant housewives in every third home, and in the rest, mostly averagely attractive ones. Tonight, I'm going to Rainbow Row along Battery on East Bay Street. This postcard depicts the Charleston Peninsula, South Carolina, and the last place in the city where a first-class detective might come on a rainy Friday evening at the end of October. When I arrived, blue and red lights were already flashing, and a pair of officers stood guard on the sidewalk in front of the pastel green Flemish tourist attraction. I turned on the flashing lights and parked the car in the second row next to the marked vehicle in the neighboring house to survey the entire scene. A few passers-by watched from both sides of the street, curious to know what was happening on the busy pedestrian street. One of the officers was waving at people, trying his best to keep the area clear. "Welcome to the land of the rich and beautiful, George," said a stout man when I entered the living room on the first floor. The big guy was the night shift sergeant this week, a sociable fellow named Paul Montague, who set the district record for the largest sandwich ever eaten by an officer from the Charleston County Sheriff's Department. It was a 60-centimeter French baguette stuffed with meatballs, marinara sauce, and half a kilogram of mozzarella cheese. He did it again a week later. Besides everything else, he was a skilled officer, and I enjoyed working with him. The crime scene is upstairs, second room on the right. It's not too messy this time. I glanced at him and slightly smiled. That's good, right? The last case we worked on together was in North Charleston when 3 Mexican illegals introduced a cartel-style necktie, which was apparently a bad drug deal and a murder out of revenge. That was really bad. If there wasn't such chaos this time, I would be grateful. I started climbing the stairs and noticed that a couple of the boards creaked noticeably. When I reached the landing and turned into the hallway, nothing seemed out of place. But if there was something, the techs would sort it out. The door to the room was double, and upon entering, I looked around. There were 2 victims, possibly 2 victims. It could have been a murder-suicide. But no, it was indeed a double homicide. The man lay on his back with his head against the headboard, naked, with 2 entry wounds in his chest, right in the center. The woman, lying across the lower part of his torso, had 5 entry wounds in the middle of her back and 4 on her buttocks. Someone really didn't like her. The technicians found 12 shell casings, one of which had pierced the headboard and embedded itself in the wall behind it. George, this guy is Carlos Pena, 28 years old, originally from St. Lucia, and works for a construction company in Edisto. He has a wife and, judging by the photos in his wallet, a couple of kids. The woman is Lucy Steinman, 39 years old, a socialite in the city, married to Marino Steinman, the official owner of significant real estate. We're still trying to locate him. Thanks, Paul. The technicians say the bullets are 9mm, but no weapon was found at the scene, so someone killed them and fled. Is there any security in the house? Paul just shrugged and said he would find out, but he needed to locate the husband to get full access without a warrant. When I looked over the scene again, I noticed a yellow silk scarf off to the side of the room, near a dresser facing the bed. Bending down to pick it up, I caught a familiar scent. It was distinctive and expensive. I recognized it as the Flower Bomb perfume by Victor and Rolf. I was familiar with it because a few months ago, I had bought this expensive gift for Michelle's birthday, along with a collection of silk scarves. What a hell of a coincidence. Michelle Rogan was visiting her sister in Savannah and had left yesterday morning, so when I turned the key in the front door, I knew the house would be empty, except for the guardian. A 40-kilogram bundle of joy in the form of Maxwell, our Doberman Pinscher. He was already at the door before I even put the key in the lock, snorting in anticipation, and when the door opened, he was practically sitting on his haunches, waiting for his kiss. He got it, and I went back to the kitchen, tossing the keys and the soft pouch onto the kitchen table. Michelle and I were both 33 years old. We didn't have children, but we were fitness enthusiasts and were trying to live the American dream here, in this small suburban neighborhood in North Mount Pleasant. This was my first marriage, her second, and after 4 years, everything seemed to be falling into place. A couple of years ago, Michelle left her job at the Mount Pleasant Planning Commission and started selling real estate. At first glance, there was nothing particularly unusual about that, but she worked with Carol Bigsby at Carter's firm. Carol was the neighborhood adulteress, living in a house on the next street over. Her husband left her and took their 2 children 3 or 4 years ago after catching her in bed with her boss in the middle of the day. Since then, according to the neighborhood grapevine, she had slept with numerous men from a couple of nearby blocks. I know the grapevine isn't always reliable, but the adulteress did come on to me directly in the living room while Michelle was in the shower, jumping on me and positioning herself suggestively. Sure, he, meaning my body, has a mind of his own, but fortunately, I had enough willpower to easily resist. So, I had concerns about how Michelle would work with her, especially since the boss was still the same guy who slept with Carol, which hastened her divorce. In the end, Michelle succeeded and now sells luxury real estate in Charleston and Kiowa. Her working hours are almost as irregular as mine. I am Detective First Class George Rogan of the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division, more commonly known as SLED, working in the investigative services in Charleston. We are called in cases of suspicious death involving a foreign national, as was the case with Carlos Pena, who was a foreigner living in the country legally. This gave us the jurisdiction to be involved at this stage. The next morning, I got up early, left the house, and headed downtown. We received processed forensic evidence packages first thing, and by the time I arrived, the package was already waiting for me. Before I could start reviewing it, one of the support staff poked her head through the door. George, Sergeant Montague from Charleston County, delivered a set of evidence on DVD. He asked me to let you know that they obtained a search warrant last night and seized several DVDs from the security system and a hard drive. These are copies. I just need you to sign for them. She leaned over me, her ample chest almost brushing my face, and smiling, handed me her pen. If I were a scoundrel, I would have made a move on her months ago. I signed where needed and watched as her hips, barely concealed by her skirt, swayed out of the door. Some future husband is going to be very lucky. A note on top of the stack said, "Don't watch this near children, George, and keep some paper towels handy." All right, he's clever, but he's still the best sergeant in Charleston. I set the stack aside and turned my attention to the evidence packet. Mr. Marino Steinman had still not been found, but was considered a person of interest, which could change once other individuals are identified on the DVDs, if they exist. In any case, we all wanted to find him. I was almost certain that George and the folks from Charleston County were already working on it. Later that day, the SLED lab report on ballistics came in, indicating that all the shots were fired from the same 9mm weapon, most likely a semi-automatic pistol, and that each shot was fired from the foot of the bed. Based on the trajectories, they estimated that the shooter held the weapon about 1.5 meters off the floor, meaning the perpetrator's height was between 1.68 meters and 1.98 meters, depending on how they held the weapon. I had to smile at the lab's precision. They always delivered such details with absolutely straight faces. As far as I knew, it could just as easily have been a 5'2" woman standing on a step stool by the bed. The evidence packet contained several photographs of the deceased, as well as some photos of the Steinman couple found in the house. According to his identification, he was 52 years old, but he didn't look older than 45. He appeared fit and attractive, in addition to his obvious wealth. This explained his appeal to his wife, though now, she was the deceased wife. By any standard, Mrs. Steinman was a beautiful woman, making full use of all the accessories of the good life. The size of the stone taken from her hand could almost pay off my house or, at the very least, put a serious dent in the mortgage. Carlos Pena, on the other hand, was an unremarkable stocky muscle man. It seems he worked as a subcontractor on several construction projects between here and Hilton Head. I assumed he was just a handsome plaything for Mrs. Steinman. Most likely, we'll find that their paths crossed somewhere at a hotel or a bar, and the next thing he knew, he had slept with some rich guy's wife and got the usual payment. It's a story we've all encountered hundreds of times in our line of work, although most of them don't end up as murder victims on Rainbow Row. "Hey, honey, are you okay?" Michelle asked me when I called her late in the evening after getting home. "I'm fine. How about you and Monique? Your mom called early yesterday morning trying to reach you, and I told her that Telcom's cell service in Savannah is terrible and she should call Monique." "Well, I didn't say terrible, but you get the idea. You'll make Mom mad if you start using foul language, George Rogan. She joked. It was one of our inside jokes. Her mother had told the girls that she had tried phone sex a few times and got hooked on it for a couple of months before realizing she preferred the real thing, and then started dating a couple of other widowers as she evolved. That's all I wanted to know. I'm going to stay one more night and we'll be back tomorrow evening. Maybe we can go out for a late dinner when I return. Michelle, darling, that would be great, but just a heads up. I might be tied up. I'm working on a murder case on East Bay at the Battery. It looks like a love nest in the wealthy district got shot up last night, and I've got 2 bodies and a missing husband. Before she replied, there was a long pause. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Oh, that's terrible. Let's hope we can still make it happen. Listen, I love you, George. See you tomorrow. We ended the call, and I set up my laptop to review the DVDs from the security system at yesterday's murder scene. Marino Steinman had spent a lot of money on video security. This wasn't the usual grainy black and white junk you buy at a discount store. It was high quality, color, digital, high definition, with precision zoom, all uploaded to a massive multi-terabyte storage device. He had cameras in all the rooms downstairs, one in the master bedroom and the hallway on the 2nd floor, as well as cameras in each hallway on the next 2 floors. I poured myself a light beer and leaned back in my chair with headphones on to block out background noise. I queued up the first DVD, starting from 9 p.m., when motion and sound activated the camera at the entrance on the 1st floor. The 2 victims entered the house, not making any effort to keep their voices down. From the sound of it, they were both drunk. They wandered around the house, making drinks, and after a few minutes, Mrs. Steinman led a clearly appreciative Mr. Pena up the stairs to the master bedroom. The key to my job is paying attention to details. That's how we solve most crimes. Aside from the criminal's own stupidity, at least Marino Steinman provided those details with stunning high-definition clarity. Lucy Steinman kneeled down, slowly undoing her partner's pants. That night, Lucy seemed to embrace indulgence in a way that was either completely natural for her or something she fully embraced for the first time. Having seen my share of mature content during my college years, I had a pretty good idea of what was happening. I used the zoom function on my laptop to get a closer look, making it feel almost as if it was happening right in front of me. She was clearly into it, with soft sounds of enjoyment escaping her. For the next few minutes, Carlos just relaxed, clearly enjoying himself, until he pulled Lucy closer by the back of her neck. Then came the moment, an incredibly intense reaction, the likes of which I hadn't seen before. It was so extreme that, for a second, I wondered if it was exaggerated for effect. I glanced at the timer to see how long it lasted. It was a solid 40 seconds, and there was nothing subtle about it. God, you're a beast, she shouted, the mess dripping from her face. It never ceases to amaze me, she said, then collapsed onto the bed, still laughing. Rinse and repeat, and I'll give you even more, Carlos replied. Now I understood what Paul meant when he said he needed paper towels. Mrs. Steinman positioned herself on Pena's lower torso and slowly started with him. After a few minutes, he was back in shape, and before he could make his move by grabbing her, I had to rewind the scene slightly. I heard the same thing I'd heard the previous night, the creaking of boards on the stairs. A few moments later, a fit figure dressed in black, with a hood over their head, came into view and, without hesitation, quickly fired 2 shots into Carlos Pena. The next shot hit the headboard, and the shooter motioned for Lucy Steinman to lie across the first victim. A moment later, 5 shots followed into the middle of her back. Then the assailant kicked Mrs. Steinman in the heel, moved to the edge of the bed, and fired 4 shots into her buttocks, clearly in anger. I rewound the video again to take a closer look at the perpetrator's wrist. When the shooter fired in a fit of rage, the black sleeve on the right arm lifted enough to reveal a silver bracelet with what I took to be an Indian pattern. I couldn't make out the details, so I took a screenshot and saved it to the disk before resuming the video. You won't be sleeping with anyone else, that's for sure, you bastard, the killer said with an accent. Now I knew that she was closer to the lower end of the height range, about 1.70 m, and that she knew Pena. Steinman was a secondary lover. Paul, I assume you saw how the perpetrator shot. Have you spoken with Mrs. Pena yet? One of the sheriff's deputies went there this morning with a Charleston PD officer, but she wasn't home. Based on what I saw on the recording, we issued a bolo for her and notified the Transportation Security Administration, but I'm not sure if we were in time. She picked up the kids from school yesterday morning. She may be completely innocent, but her actions before and after the shooting are concerning, and we'd like to bring her in for questioning. Charleston County will obtain a warrant for a full search of the premises in her absence. Oh, by the way, we found Marino Steinman this evening. He was at the Doubletree Hotel in Savannah and returned an hour ago. It's pretty clear he's not the perpetrator. He claims he accidentally turned off his phone. He was hiding out with some chick who wasn't there when the officers spoke with him. They just noted the lavender-colored lingerie and a pair of leopard print stilettos that they're pretty sure weren't his size. Paul chuckled as he finished, and we wrapped up the conversation. What were the odds that they both ended up in Savannah at the same time? Of course, it could be a coincidence. I've seen enough of those in my relatively short career. The closet door still stuck a little when I opened it, and I reminded myself that I needed to fix that. She's so meticulous about keeping all her things, everything in a row and in its place. I looked for them and couldn't find them. A gap had appeared in the row where they should have been. I think they were high heels. Actually, they were Gom Chelsea boots, a gift from her mom for Christmas a couple of years ago. Over $500 from the Harrods online store. Paired with some tight yoga pants and her killer legs, she looked stunning in them, but they were gone. Suspicion can bring strange thoughts to a man's mind, and if there's one mantra that penetrates us more than any other, it's leave your emotions aside. I was taught to recognize when I'm acting or reacting more on emotions than on facts. I did exactly that, allowing emotional suspicion to guide my actions. It was 11 o'clock at night, 24 hours after I arrived at the scene on Rainbow Row. I still needed to go through the remaining DVDs, but that could wait until tomorrow. Maxwell made it clear that he needed a late-night walk, so the two of us headed out with a flashlight and a dog waste bag in hand. It was mostly quiet, and after a few minutes, I found myself approaching Carol Bigsby's house, noticing she had company for the evening. Some things never change. Maxwell did his business near her mailbox. I picked it up, and we moved on. It was past midnight by the time I collapsed into bed and didn't move until 8 in the morning. After a quick run and a light breakfast, I set up the other DVDs, intending to start reviewing them for evidence. But before I could begin, I received a call from Paul Montague. George, we found out where Mrs. Pena flew to. Mrs. Castelda Portala Pena is a citizen of Belize, and late last night, she arrived in Belize City after traveling to the Dominican Republic by boat. She also withdrew a substantial amount of cash from her bank accounts and accessed the family safe deposit box on Friday afternoon. She must have been hustling with that much money in a place like that. The U.S. has an extradition treaty with Belize, so we can try to get her back, but after talking with the U.S. attorney last night, it's likely to be a long process, if it ever happens at all. They don't easily extradite their own citizens, and when they do, they usually require assurances that there won't be a death penalty or life imprisonment involved. I'll keep that in mind if I need to rough someone up. Paul, do you have any other good news? He just laughed at me. We're planning to talk to Marino Steinman later. Do you want to join us? I agreed and arranged to meet them at the Steinman house at 1 p.m. With a fresh cup of coffee and a satisfied Maxwell standing on the porch, I queued up the DVDs in reverse order, starting from 9 p.m. on Friday. Throughout the day, the only activity was Mrs. Steinman and the housekeeper moving around the house, with the housekeeper arriving at 10 minutes past 9. The next DVD showed an earlier encounter between the two deceased, starting from 10 p.m. on Thursday until he left at 2 a.m. Earlier activities were a repeat of the previous day, and the DVDs from Tuesday and Wednesday were uneventful. It seemed that Marino Steinman had been absent from home during those days. Interest only picked up again on Monday. On Monday morning, the housekeeper arrived at the usual time and left by noon. Lucy Steinman was not visible in the morning and didn't move around upstairs. At 1:20 p.m., Marino Steinman arrived home, allowing himself and a petite brunette into the living room. Their familiarity suggested this wasn't their first encounter. The woman approached the bar and prepared 2 drinks. "So, I understand your wife won't be back until tomorrow?" she asked Steinman, handing him a drink. "Her flight arrives at 11 tomorrow morning, so there's no rush, baby." I watched as he took the drink from her hand and pulled off her tight size 4 dress over her head, leaving her standing in size 4 SX panties and a size 3 bra. She stood in front of him, about 1 meter 57 tall, rubbing against him. The canary yellow scarf had already fallen to the floor, and Steinman bent down, picked it up, and brought it to his nose. The woman, weighing around 50 kilograms, squatted down, balancing on 7.5 centimeter stilettos. 5 minutes later, she pulled away from him, and Steinman laid her on her back on the soft couch. I should have stopped watching, but I couldn't. When they were finished, she cleaned him up, and they both headed upstairs. The camera in the master bedroom showed them both entering the bathroom, and 20 minutes later, they emerged, and the woman went downstairs to retrieve her clothes. When she returned, Steinman picked up the yellow scarf again and inhaled its scent before tossing it onto the dresser. I recognized the scent. It was Flower Bomb by Victor and Rolf. I paused the DVD, stepped out onto the porch, and patted my faithful friend. "Max, it's a crazy world. Believe me." Returning to the DVD, I quickly fast-forwarded through the recording of their daily routine, and around 9 p.m., Steinman and his lover entered the bedroom and resumed their activities from the previous day. The whole process didn't take him long. I watched for a while, then zoomed in on the tattoo on her right buttock. I had seen one like it before, and with that, I turned off the DVD player and prepared for my meeting with Marino Steinman. The crime scene footage had been recorded that morning, even before we arrived. Paul Montague worked fast. We grabbed a quick lunch at Human's Deli before heading over to meet him, and I brought up my newly discovered concerns. Yes, I reviewed everything up to last Monday. "So, you know I'll have to talk to her?" he asked me. "Standard procedure, Paul, I know. Michelle will be back tonight. I'll let her know." After quickly comparing our notes, the two of us headed to meet Steinman and another county investigator. Mr. Steinman was waiting for us with his personal attorney. In person, he was rather unimpressive. Now, I could see his age on his face, but he still appeared fit and in good physical shape. Paul introduced himself, and as we shook hands, I didn't see the slightest hint of recognition, though I didn't expect him to recognize me. We had never met, of course, and I never felt that people in such high positions paid any attention to ordinary folks unless they wanted something from them. Paul began the interrogation. "Mr. Steinman, let me express our condolences for your loss and assure you that we have dedicated significant resources to bringing this case to a satisfactory conclusion. Now, regarding the victims, your wife and a man named Carlos Pena, were you aware of their affair?" Steinman simply shook his head. "No." "All right then. As for Mr. Carlos Pena, had you ever met him or had any dealings with him, his business, or any other members of his family?" "Not that I recall," he replied. The big guy simply took his notes and continued. "All right, now let's go back a few days. You're aware that we have DVDs from your security system that retain recordings for several days, correct?" He nodded in confirmation. "Good. Could you name the people you entertained in this house on Monday afternoon and evening?" Steinman consulted with his attorney and then gave her name. As he did, Paul shot me a concerned look, which Steinman noticed. At that point, his attorney intervened and insisted that no unrelated third parties be involved in this interrogation. Paul wasn't keen on that. "From our perspective, counselor, the woman in question remains an important witness until we've questioned her. Mr. Steinman, have there been any other women visiting these premises with or without your wife in the past 2 weeks?" I advise my client not to answer that question. We consider it irrelevant. Paul just smiled slightly and pulled out 3 enlarged photographs from his notes. "Do you recognize the woman in these photographs?" Steinman looked at them for a long time, considering his response. He consulted with his attorney, and the meeting was abruptly terminated. My client will no longer discuss any matters with any representative of the Charleston County Sheriff's Department or any other law enforcement agency at this time. If he is not being detained for questioning, I ask you to leave the premises." Paul and I had anticipated this. We didn't reveal the woman's identity to Steinman because someone with nothing to hide would have shared that information himself. In his case, however, he didn't disclose that he had dined with Mrs. Castelda Portalapina, unaware that it had been caught on surveillance cameras last Wednesday at the very same place where we had just had lunch, Human's Deli. Warrants had already been issued to seize bank records when the banks opened on Monday morning and to search Steinman's offices on Meeting Street. While we were speaking, the sheriff's office and SLED were already conducting the search. After our initial meeting, I had to step away from the case. Nevertheless, Paul kept me informed, albeit unofficially. During our lunch earlier, he explained, yesterday at the deli, when I came in for a sandwich, the owner was chatting with me. He'd heard about the shooting at Steinman's house and mentioned that a few days earlier, Marino Steinman had been at his establishment. He was a regular customer there. So, I requested the surveillance footage, and sure enough, last Wednesday, he was having lunch here with a woman. Interestingly, the woman resembled Mrs. Castelda Portalapina, and she was wearing a bracelet on her right wrist similar to the one the perpetrator was wearing during the shooting. As evidence, he provided the photos we have now, as well as the original DVD. At this point, we suspect that Steinman knew his wife was committing adultery, and Mrs. Pena either knew about it too or was informed by him. I think he paid her to carry out the attack, but now we have to prove it. He might not have even needed to pay her. She could have taken pleasure in what we saw. In any case, he definitely handed her an envelope across the table, and now she's, as they say, vanished. Additional evidence might help us lure her out of Belize. I've probably said this 100 times, George. Stupidity is what brings it all down every time. That evening, while waiting for Michelle to return, I remembered our first meeting. She and her sister Monique were deadheads, and we were at the same Phil Lesh and Friends show at the Coliseum. We hit it off right away, and I asked her out later that week. From that moment on, we became something special, and a week later, I had the pleasure of enjoying the unique talents of her 157 centimeters, 50 kilograms body, with size 4 panties, 4SX underwear, and a size 3 bust. I remember a 1973 Dead show from Boston Garden playing in the background, and when I started caressing her, I came face to face with an incredible American Beauty tattoo on her bare buttock. The details and colors were perfect, almost like the album cover. It seems Marino Steinman had seen one like that too. Michelle turned the key in the front door at 9:15, and Maxwell immediately wagged his stubby tail. His personality around her was different than with me. With me, everything was masculine, with a bond between men, but with Michelle, he was a puppy again. She walked into the kitchen, tossed her keys on the kitchen table, then came over, hugged me, and kissed me. "How's your case going?" she asked. "I've been taken off it for now," I replied. "By the way, where are the gum boots that Mom gave you for Christmas?" She gave me a strange look before answering. "Why do you need to know about my gums? I know you're not going to wear them." "Just curious. I was looking for something in the closet and noticed they were missing." "Oh, well, I traded them with Monique for a pair of Fendi shoes. I didn't know you liked them." I didn't say anything. "Hey, listen, why don't you take a shower, and I'll fix you a drink when you're done." When she returned, I handed her a glass of wine and a light beer. It had been nearly 48 hours since I first entered that house on East Bay Friday night. First of all, let me tell you about the case I was working on. It's incredible. Paul Montague was on it, and as always, he did a fantastic job. Well, the house at 95 Rainbow Row belonged to a guy named Steinman. The victims were his wife and her lover. The guy's wife is the prime suspect, but Paul thinks that Steinman himself is also involved. I watched her reaction and noticed a hint of hesitation, a brief flicker of recognition on her face. Paul wants to talk to everyone connected to Steinman, including anyone who might have been in the house earlier. We have surveillance footage from a few days ago. I paused for effect and saw that Michelle was becoming uncomfortable, though she tried her best to hide it, unsuccessfully. She realized that I knew, and there was no point in denying it. "How long?" "I think almost 6 months." "Why did you get involved in this at all? You know how I feel about infidelity." George, I don't know why. Monique kept telling me how thrilling it was and that she'd done it twice before, and Donnie never found out. Donnie was Monique's husband, and damn, he wouldn't want to hear this kind of talk about his beloved sister-in-law. Monique and I have always done everything together, ever since we were little girls. We never had secrets from each other. If she did something, I would do it too, and vice versa. If I bought a new dress, she would too. If she bought new perfume, I had to try it as well. That's why she got the Victor and Rolf you gave me a few months ago. That's just how we've always been. Do you think it was so thrilling that it was worth risking our marriage? Now, her eyes were filled with tears, and an image of the American Beauty tattoo on the right buttock of a very beautiful woman who was very close to me flashed before my eyes. Michelle stood up, went to the kitchen, and pulled a bag of fruit snacks out of the cupboard. As she did, her t-shirt rode up, revealing her firm, bare, and very beautiful buttocks. On the left buttock of that beautiful behind was an American Beauty tattoo, identical to the one her identical twin sister, Monique, had on her right. Paul will have to talk to her, you know that, right? She just nodded, returned to the table, and kissed her husband. Thank you for listening until the end.